Welcome to Akasha Talks, a podcast on consciousness, healing, and different ways to interact and weave those together, both old and new, to be able to get the most out of your life. I'm your host, Lance Baker, coming to you from Newcastle, Australia. Hope you kick back, relax, and enjoy the show. Welcome, Jack. How are you today?
Hello, I'm doing quite well. Thank you, Lance. Very glad to be here.
Now, I've invited you on to talk about a thing called the PGM and some courses you run on them. And that terminology, to some of my audience, they know exactly what I'm talking about, and to others, it's just complete Greek. Could you tell me a little bit about what the PGM is that I'm referring to there?
Sure, absolutely. And before I do, I'll kind of mention, because it's an ancient magical text or a collection of ancient magical texts, right? But it's always dicey to use the word ancient, because when we think of ancient, we think of anything, beyond last week, or anything beyond our birth, or anything, before the time of cowboys or something like that. And we sort of lump it all together, we sort of just put it all together. And we ignore the fact that the past is this multi-layered and often mysterious amalgam of these different ages. And sometimes the earliest ages were more developed than the later ones. And sometimes, the times closest to us are more foreign to us. So it can be a bit of a mixed bag. But there was a period called late antiquity, which was between about 300 and 500 AD. And in that time, the Roman Empire was in the process of crumbling, and the pagan world was in the process of changing to a Christianized world in which many pagan themes and powers would continue. And out of that world, in Roman Egypt, there came to be a tradition of magic that's recorded in several hundred magical spells that we have in our possession. And those magical spells show how the people of the time, a people in great crisis, pulled in many different directions with politics, with climate, with the economy, with foreigners and wars and rates of inflation, taxes, and spiritual confusion, could turn to these magicians to find help, to find solace in their magic. And the PGM, which is short for the Greco-Egyptian Magical Papyri, is that collection of magical spells, or one of the biggest. And it's filled with remarkable workings. And because Roman Egypt at this time was an amalgam of different cultures, they're synthetic too. They have a syncretized Roman gods and Egyptian gods and Hellenic gods and Jewish gods. There's Persian powers, there's astrology, there's Nubian deities, there's elemental forces, there's references to literary heroes, there's ghost stories. It's this incredible concoction. It's like a stew into which everything imaginable has been thrown into. And it's created, remarkably, this delicious and potent brew. So that's the PGM, and it has the best spells to the goddess Hekate are in the PGM. Remarkable invocations to the Gnostic demiurge are in the PGM. Incredible conjurations of Isis and Anubis and the great god Typhon Set are in the PGM, as well as all kinds of calls to everything from angels to demons and everything in between. So it's really, really, really a remarkable text, but it's a bit dense. It is a collection of scrolls, not a novel written by a modern author. And so I offer a course called PGM 1, the Foundation, which starts in a month, and PGM 2, the Kingdom, which starts in next week at the time we're recording this on March 17th. And it's a way for people to explore the world of the PGM, from a contemporary standpoint, of course.
Yes. And I dive straight into the what is it. Now people have got a little bit of a question probably of who are you?
Me? I'm nobody, as Emily Dickinson would say. Who are you? No, no. Yeah, it's always polite to introduce yourself first, right? Well, to be clear, let me say what I'm not. I'm not a scholar. I'm not an academic. I'm not a professor at a university. And I'm not someone that claims that I have a bunch of letters or PhDs after my name that justify, you know, my approach to this material. I'm an enthusiast. I'm a dilettante. I'm an amateur in the best sense of the word, as someone who does it for love. I love these texts. I've found them incredibly meaningful. And I've used them for years to practice what we could call it's a spiritual path, but you could call it magic, and to introduce other people to them by, curating some of the most ones I find most exciting and talking to them about what these could mean for us today. So I write, I'm an author. I wrote a book called The Hekataeon, which is a book of invocations to the goddess Hekate. I wrote a play called Sigrun and the Mist, which is recently published and by myself, I might add, and through a Grayle press. And it's a full-length play exploring the themes of destiny and fate through the lens of Norse myth. It's a play about a Valkyrie who's broken her oath to Odin. And I write verse and I teach classes and I publish myself and other people's work. I work with Larry Roberts at Miskatonic Books, who's a good friend of mine, and we publish the Taya Cult books by Peter Jenks, which are marvelous collections of the living spiritual and magical tradition of Buddhist folk magic in Thailand. And also, we've published books like Lioness, New Hymn to Inanna, and books by Auriel de Fenestrate Bascule, art books and books of invocation of various gods. So I love writing, I love publishing, I love magic, I love theater, and I sort of teach adjacent to all of those things, mainly as a way to meet people more interesting and more talented than me, which is why I'm on this show here too, by the way. Just, gotcha.
It's why I created this show. The excuse to talk to people I wanted to talk to about the subjects I love. That's fantastic. Now, there's one other person I'd like to ask who is, and that's the guy who is the PGM. Like, what are these scrolls from? Like,
what's their, where do they come from? What's the basis of them, right? Well,
yeah.
like every deity, they come from a combination of places: the human heart, the natural world, and the nexus that exists between those two things, and of course the human imagination, right? Because like Alan Moore, I really do believe that magic and artistry are the same thing. I think that when one creates, whether it's to create a company or a podcast like you have, or a poem or a novel like some people do, or a ritual with a circle and a conjuration, you're bringing forth something into being that never existed before, right? You're literally conjuring it into being, whether you call it magic or not. But the gods in the PGM, they come from the cultures, of course, that informed those workings. And at the time, Roman Egypt was, of course, was filled with indigenous Africans who were practicing a millennia-old tradition of compulsive magic. But it was overlaid for hundreds of years that had an upper class that was Hellenic after Alexander the Great conquered them. And so there was a European Hellenic intellectual aspect to them. And when we talk about Hermeticism, that spiritual sort of Gnostic Platonic worldview, deeply Egyptian, came out of that aristocratic class. But they were under Roman rule at the time, and so that they had Roman gods, and they had a huge Jewish population. So the Abrahamic God, as well as Michael the Archangel, Gabriel, and all those were intermixed with their culture. And they also had Persian astrology, which is very popular and had been for hundreds of years there. They had a strong Nubian element along their southern border in Upper Egypt that added a very, unmitigated African, confluence to this mix. And of course, they had bits and tidbits of other cultures thrown in there as well. So, and some of the gods they worship were actually formally syncretic. Like there was a god Serapis who was part Zeus and part Osiris. So a very clear conjoining, official, conjoining of the cult of the Roman gods, the Olympians, and one of the most popular gods in Egypt. And there would be other gods like Hermanubis, combination of Hermes and Anubis. And so there was both kind of an informal influence and there was a formal intermingling of these powers. So if you live in a multicultural world like you and I do, we might eat Thai food for lunch and Mexican food for dinner, and go listen to indigenous music at night, and then get online and chat from someone from Europe. Their world was very similar, with soldiers and mariners and pilgrims and people like that traveling all through their country, bringing these different cultural currents. And of course, as paganism, diminished and the Christianity increased, there was sort of an identity crisis at the time, which is not unfamiliar to us now. Yeah. So their gods were deeply personal gods that came from their cultures and from the cultures of the other that they lived close to.
And the PGM, it's not an armchair magician. This was a working man's notes of what he was doing.
Right. No, you make a good point. It's not, and that's one of the reasons why I taught the class. The text, because it's a collection of scrolls probably dug up from a grave in Upper Egypt near Thebes, it's not like a book, even though they're collected in a book. And anyone who goes to read them will right away encounter some challenges, which is that there's not a coherent narrative linking them all together. The order in which the spells are in has no rhyme or reason much of the time. Many of the spells have lacunae or gaps. They're missing the beginning, or there's a patch in the middle, or there's a part at the end that's not there. Some of them are duplicative. Some of them refer to ingredients by slang words that we don't know what they were saying. Others have instructions which are, literally impossible to follow, unless you lived back then. So there can be an initial dismay looking through it to think, oh, wait, if you're not a Roman Egyptian magician, this is not for us, right? There can also be some shocking elements to the PGM, to the casual reader. If you've gone straight from reading Llewellyn paperbacks to the PGM, there's going to be some jaw-dropping moments in this book. And so it can be off-putting. Some people can be like, oh, I've heard about the PGM, and several of my favorite Hekate spells say they come from the PGM, and then they pick up the PGM and they think, what is this? This is strange or incomprehensible or offensive or weird or just too dense. So the point of these classes was to try to present the most doable spells and describe the tech behind them, what makes them work, why do they work the way they do. But to understand the tech, you have to understand the culture from which they came. And to understand the culture, you have to know a bit about the history, right? So it's fun. It sounds like a history. Everyone's like, no thanks. But it's actually fun because these spells themselves have the double benefit of being both beautiful and powerfully written, really moving, but also very effective. Like they work. It's a system that works on its own merits, both internally on a spiritual level and externally on a very practical level. It is a functional magical system, and the results can be startlingly effective.
And I heard you talk before about it, the workings of this back in the day was like street sorcery, where the practitioner and the clients, they're at risk, a great risk of their life for this. So you don't do that if you feel it's bullshit.
No, right. No, it's a good point. And one of the first things I talk about when we do these classes, there can be an attitude that, wouldn't it be great to live back in the old days when everyone could just get their magic on and be magical and not have to deal with, being judged and stuff. But in fact, magic was illegal in the Roman Empire. Like you could be crucified for practicing it, and you could be burned alive for teaching it or writing it or being the distributor. Okay, so like these were, and they would systematically purge Rome of all magical books and astrologers and things like that, not because they thought it was fake, but because they thought it was real. And they weren't going to put up with it. If you could magically make someone sick from a distance, well, that put the emperor at risk, right? So out it goes. It's illegal. You can't do it. Now the emperor would have astrologers, and the emperor would have access to magic, right? Much like Queen Elizabeth I having access to John Dee and Edward Kelly, but it wasn't for the normal people. But normal people were the ones that needed it most. Normal people didn't have a million gold bricks in there. And normal people were the ones, and oftentimes it's really moving, Lance, sometimes, because when you read these spells, you can see who they're meant for. It's like a spell so that your master will not lash you. It's a spell so you can get out of, not be indicted by the judge. A spell so that your shop won't go under for lack of customers. A spell to be respected by your peers and not bullied. A spell to be loved instead of ignored. Like it, you read it and you're like, well, I know exactly who we're talking about here. We're talking about people with very few resources who live on the margins probably often, even though it's very likely that all segments of society would have, availed themselves of magic, but many of the magical spells are meant for people who are in trouble, like real trouble. And that's one of the things that makes them relevant,
Yes, because that makes it extremely relevant for today and the way the world movements are happening and the growing divide of wealth and
Right.
poverty.
Right.
Sounds very fitting for a lot.
It does, right? And I go into it more in my course, but they lived in a world back then where there was great climate change, changing the climate. The climate change drove massive migration of barbarians from Central Europe into Northern Europe, which caused all these German tribesmen to migrate unchecked into the Roman Empire. So they were dealing with huge immigration problems, basically, and also cultural identity problems. All these people coming in didn't speak their language, didn't have the same religion, didn't have the same cultural background, they didn't look the same. And because of this, there was a huge problem, but there was also a lack of morale. There was in the Roman Empire, you didn't have young people volunteering to be in the army. No one wanted to fight. So the empire would just tax people heavier so that they could pay one group of barbarians to fight another group of barbarians. And that would work for 6 months. And then both sets would attack the empire, and the empire have to pay a third one to fight them and raise taxes again. It was almost like a Ponzi scheme of pay more for ever shortening periods of safety. And at the same time, you have plagues in the empire, wiping out entire cities. You have a boredom, a malaise with the old Roman cult. People just weren't feeling it anymore. It's been thousands of years. They weren't interested. They were attracted to these new, vibrant, exciting Eastern cults, with clanging cymbals and bloodletting and weird eschatologies and graphic myths and things like that. So there was a combination of terrible leadership, high taxes, mass migration, climate change, plagues, high rates of inflation, pending warfare, political instability, increasingly draconian punishments for normal people doing normal things, and a real sense, especially with the rise of the Christian cult, that you were on a tipping ship that was taking on water that was just about to sink, and no one knew what came next. So that's the culture this magic came out of. And I hope everyone listening to it will kind of nod and be like, well, that sounds familiar. Like we're probably more similar to those people 1,700 years ago than we might be with our great-grandparents' generation, with the encroaching political instability, AI, things like that. I mean, there've always been wars and diseases and such, but there is very much consonance between who we are now and what we're dealing with, and who they were then and what they were dealing with. And that's one of the reasons I think their system of magic is so accessible to us today, because whether we know it or not, we live in the same world.
And so you've built these two different classes on that. I'm really interested, and I think my audience listening here would be really interested in number 2 that starts next week. But can you tell me about 1 and then 2 of the differing things of what these classes are that you've developed?
Yeah, absolutely. PGM1 is the first class I built. I call it the Foundation. It's basically like a greatest hits of spells in the PGM, right? It's got full of wonderful stuff. These classic bangers to Hekate and Typhon Set, god of the desert, destruction and division, to Anubis and Osiris, to Iao, the Gnostic, demiurge, and dozens of other powers as well. Okay, so the PGM1 is like, here's the best of the best going through the course, right? And so it's just one incredible thing after the next. PGM2, I had a very special intention, which is how do we, what became clear when I was teaching PGM1 is these spells were great, but these spells require a real sense of authority on the part of the magician, the witch, the priest, the practitioner, okay, the ritualist. This style of magic is nothing like Christian prayer, where you're begging for favors and admitting you're crummy, okay? Like Christian prayer is like, please forgive me, I'm so awful, I'll never do it again, please, please, I beg you for this one small little thing, That is the absolute opposite attitude needed for this style of magic. This style of magic derives from pharaonic ritual, meaning the rituals of the pharaohs. The pharaohs believed themselves to be divine, right? So they spoke as if they were divine, and they performed magic as if they were gods. And that style of magic over 1,000 years morphed and altered and became the PGM style, but it never left that vibe. The ritualist is always the god of his or her own world. And it's not bad to say that. That idea continues. When you see a magician in the Renaissance drawing a circle, it says Alpha and Omega in the middle, standing in the middle, and calling upon the spirit of the hour and the day, right? That magician, whether that magician admits it or not, has made themselves like God. The circle is a world. They're in the middle of the world. It says Alpha by their left foot, Omega by their right. They call upon a power of the day. They will tell it what to do. They'd say, well, do so by the authority of God. But in fact, that magician is a small god within his small world. The same principle applies in the PGM magic. You are letting divine power flow through you, right? You are speaking as if you are the god Thoth, as if you're an embodiment of Hekate, which is that Egyptian principle of energy, of power, of potentiality, of might, the capability to change things, of charisma, of talent, of creativity, right? So you're like a small sun. You're doing in micro what the major gods did in macro. But that takes a lot of chutzpah, right? It takes an attitude. And a lot of people had trouble with that. They're like, well, I come from a Christian background. I don't feel comfortable saying these words. And so I thought, it would be good to have a different class to help build up that inner fire, to help build up that confidence, to sort of grow people's authority, not far beyond what it is, but to what it should be. Because most of us, I don't know if you have any sense of this too, but most of us occupy like 2% of the territory that we were born to. Most of us are used most of our lives making concession after concession after concession to the government, to our partners, to our spouses, to our workmates, to our friends, to our siblings, concession, 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 to what we're left with. It's like painting yourself in a corner. You're so small. You're so much smaller than you had a right to be. And this magic is a way to take that territory back. It's to discover our own sovereignty, to say, I'm bigger than anyone thinks I am. I'm more powerful than I even believe I am. I have more potential that anyone notices or sees. I'm going to discover that. There are ways in which I'm like the gods because I'm of the gods. They live in me and I live in them. And that current that animates them can flow through me too. And it can be activated by the tech in the PGM and the magical tech, the technology. is, there's magical voices, there's conjurations, there's formulae, there's taking on sort of a literal God face technique where you declare yourself to be a deity. I am Isis, I am Sekhmet, I am Thoth, right? And it's not a lie, because what you're saying is that Thoth power is flowing through me now. I speak for that authority because I am of that authority, right?
Mhm.
So it's the PGM2 is a way to sort of blow on that coal to make the flame reemerge that's deep inside of us, this flame of power and potential, so that people can perform the bangers and the top 50 hits from the PGM, right? Because it takes some. It's like you don't go on a world tour playing your music unless you've met with your band for a few months and you practice your hits, or you know what happens. You get booed off the stage. So that's the idea between the two classes, and both are fun in their way. But
That sounds wonderful. And
yeah, I'll say this too. PGM2 is a little different too, because I don't restrict myself to just the PGM. There's a lot of great PGM spells in it, but I also go backwards in time, and I pull magical spells from the coffin texts and the pyramid texts, which are thousands of years older. And I also go forward in time, and I pull spells from ancient Christian magic that developed in the 500 years after the official fall of paganry, to show how there's a continuum and there's continuity between them. Even though we talk about one age ending, another beginning, the actual spiritual current continued. It replaced certain elements to remain culturally relevant. And we can do that too. Like this, the magic we practice, we can adapt it. It doesn't have to and shouldn't look exactly like what it did 1700 years ago. We're not ancient Egyptians,
Yes.
To say the least. It looks silly. This isn't about just putting on a headdress like King Tut, and it's about being you in your world, but accessing ancient power to be able to grow a contemporary sense of authority and sovereignty that can help you in very practical ways. Like it's not just a head game. It's meant to improve your life.
It very much sounds like PGM2 is more of a prequel than a sequel to
It kind of is. That's well said. That's well said. Yeah, it's true. I should probably change the name. I went, but it is true. And you can take either one. Obviously, you don't have to take one before you take two, and you don't have to take two before you take one. But the two of them do. There's like real similarities between them, but they're very different in flavor too. And it feels like two is more about really developing personal empowerment, and one is about using that power to improve your life in the ways that matter, So, and
one of my mates, Tim from Nightbird Radio, he did one and talked my ear off how wonderful that was, and how impactful that was for his practice. So that got me interested in your work.
Sure.
Other people say good things before as well, but hearing that personal account really helped tune my frequency into your awareness that little bit more. But a couple of days ago, you put a video out about the PGM2 class that I watched and found it interesting. And in that, you plugged that you were sharing, because it was right before the eclipse, that you were giving away the red moon ritual, the red moon howl.
Yes, the red moon howl, right?
And so I'm watching this, and it's of the night of the eclipse, and I checked the time of what time it's gonna be happening, and I was watching the red moon howl video an hour before it was time for it. So I scrambled some things together and hit the road and went out.
Did you? Fantastic.
To some
Good
farmland, not too far away, to a crossroads, and had to go at doing this module of the class with a shadow work concept of reclaiming my power, kind of like what you just shared there earlier, which you hadn't exactly fully prompted in that regard. You'd said some ways in there, but your language just 5 minutes ago was even better than what you'd shared before for that thing. But so I was doing it for the shadow concept of how I give my power away, and I wanted to claim that back
Yeah.
in different relationship dynamics and things
Yeah.
like this. And so I did it, and I was finished, packed up. There was a big, like, we call them whiz bins in Australia, big gigantic trash can right on the corner of the crossroad that I like was completely empty. It had just been emptied. That I like chucked my bottle that had the gross water in it, and the printout of your PDF in there, and I'm gonna go, and I got this prompt straight away of like, you're not done. You stick your head in that bin and get that paper out. Do it again, because with the howl bit, I had no power with that howl. So I did it again, and then I went to pack up again. Didn't throw it in the bin this time yet. I got thrice. Okay, and so I did it again, and then I actually felt the power to do the howl with a real howl, and I laughed because it was like, well, there was a thing of threes within that ritual as it is, and I had to do the ritual 3 times, but each time I felt my power in myself rise, and it wasn't what I was asking for in that magical concept of my power to howl at the eclipsing moon, but it gave that as well. That just showed me, oh, I'm giving you what you're asking for, and here's an example right now. That it was a very tangible thing. That was just a spur of the moment thing. Like there was this few hour window where I'd been exposed to your module, put it into practice, and felt something happen. So that got me really excited, which is why we're having this chat right now.
That's a great story. And you know what? Your instincts are so good, because something I didn't even mention, and for anyone who hasn't read that, if you contact me, message me or something like that, and I'll send you a copy of the spell, the PDF and the video, because it's a conjuration of Hekate Selene, the moon goddess conflated with Hekate, conflated with Aphrodite, to call upon this lunar power. And I suggested using it on the lunar eclipse, because there's all kinds of sort of baneful imagery used in it: she-wolf, horse-headed goddess, things like that, very intimidating. And but what's funny, Lance, is I didn't say do it multiple times, but one of the most standard PGM texts is to do it repeatedly. In PGM magic, often more is more. And I usually tell the people that take my classes, like, do it a couple of times. These spells only take 1.5 minutes to recite often. Like, why only do it once? Do it a couple times, especially since the first time you do it, if you're like me, you're tripping over the words. They feel weird in the mouth. It's kind of awkward. It might be hard to see them or read them. The second time, it feels a little better. The third time, they start to feel natural in the mouth. And what you say begins to sound like your words, not you quoting someone else or reading off a paper. If you do it a fourth, fifth time, you might even be able to look away from the paper and gaze up the moon while you're saying it, And very frequently, each spell is different, but often they'll say, do this 3 times, or do this 5 times, or do it 7 times, do it many times. And it's this idea that the magic starts to happen once we stop thinking too hard about it. And that's what distinguishes it from intellectual exercises where you're visualizing this, or you're trying to imagine that, or it's very heady, The magic of the PGM is visceral. It's of the body. It's of the flesh, right? And so the more, when you repeat stuff, your cerebral mind eventually gets bored and drifts off. But the words keep coming out of your mouth, and the words live in your body now, your lungs and your heart. And if you gesture, if you clap your hands or stomp your foot, if you kneel, if you get your body involved, it sort of jumpstarts that physicality, that visceralness of the magic, and that's when it starts to happen. Because it's so good for you. I love the fact that your own instincts, your intuition told you, do it a couple times. Don't just say it and leave it. Like, actually live with it for a minute, and it's cool. I love the fact how each time you did it, you could sort of feel it gearing up, like priming a pump, having more effect. That's great.
Yes. Yeah, I did notice that body feel as well, which I wasn't expecting so much, like the stomp that's within it. It did feel pantomime the first time, where I could feel the energy running through my body more with those later times with that it didn't feel like an act, a play that I was doing. It felt like a movement of that power of the call.
Yeah. No, it's something else, and it's also and in fact, just in case, if there's going to be people listening to this that haven't read it, do you mind if I just read a couple lines from it, just to give?
Go for it.
I mean, this is just so people know what we're talking about here. So this is taken from my PGM2 class. It's one of the spells we look at the end of the year-long. It's a year-long online course. I should have said that at the beginning, so that you can view the videos anytime. You can read the PDFs anytime. There's no homework. Like if you join in March and you don't get around to watching the videos till June, that's fine. And you continue to have access to it. And even if you lose the access, you'll be given it back. So it's once you have it for good. But this spell is a remarkable piece. And I'll read a little bit from it. I won't read the whole thing, but this is the section toward the end. Listen to this, where it says, "Come to me, she-wolf. Come to me, mistress of night and chthonic realms, holy, clad in black, always in flux, always the same. Round you the star-traversing void revolves, where'er you wax too great. Aye, it is known, you have established every worldly thing, for you engendered everything on earth, and from the sea, to include every race of winged bird which leave their nest and find their nests again. O mother of all who bore love, Aphrodite, lamp-bearer, shining, aglow, Selene, star-coursing, heavenly torch-bearer, fire-breather, hear me. O woman four-faced, four-named, four-roads mistress, hail, goddess, attend your epithets. O heavenly one, harbor goddess, who roam the mountains, goddess of the crossroads, nether one, infernal, eternal, goddess of darkness, come to my sacrifice." It's just fantastic, man. Like it's just red meat for someone who wants to engage with chthonic powers and celestial powers and lunar powers on an intimate basis, because that's what we're doing. We're not just worshiping it. We're saying, come here, come into my space, cross the threshold of my own body, my own mind, cross the threshold of my vision. I've had all kinds of people reach out to me talking about when they did that ritual last night during the lunar eclipse. There's reference to, the goddess, and there's one person that left the ritual with a nosebleed. So she was bleeding from the mouth. So her face was red, just like the moon's was. There was someone else who was followed by a black cat to a crossroads, that watched her while she performed the ritual. All these people, these epiphanies happen, especially if you do them outdoors like you did. If you actually leave your house and allow the divine to actually have epiphanies through the natural world, it's remarkable the experience people have. And that's been one of the shocks here. Like magic always has a healthy and internal effect upon us, I think, because you're taking power back. The words themselves help. What's remarkable is how often there's visible participation from the outside world. And it might not be a glowing vision of a transparent figure in a toga, but, very often people have encounters of one kind or another when they do these workings. And the encounters, to me, are very clearly signs that they've been heard and that their magic is being answered, and that hand they extend into the darkness is being grasped by the power that they conjured. I mean, I love it. There's nothing better.
Yes, I loved as well. I went to set up, I went and found a crossroads, since there's a bit about crossroads in there. I was like, I'm going to do it at a crossroads. In this nice little farmland area. And one of the farms was people that grow like turf, grass. So there was this beautifully mowed, nice, soft, lush grassland corner to do it. I was like, well, I'm gonna do it here rather than the muddy, crappy bit. And as soon as I started to do it, was like, I got everything telling me no, 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 no. And so I moved across to the muddy, dirty bit, and I laughed. I was like, well, I guess this does fit the part of what you were saying with it. But then as I was doing it, the one road was busier than I thought it would be, the main road. But the corner of where it was led to the homestead of the people with the turf business. Two of their cars went up there while I was doing the thing, and I was like, they would have interrupted me as well. Like, they would have been like, what are you doing on our turf? Or just been mentally interfering, where they paid me no heed because I was on this property opposite that's for sale, and not interested. That it was like something within it already gave me a nudge to say no, not quite there. I liked.
Good for you. It sounds like you're very in touch with your own inner voice, right? Your instincts, and that's the best thing a person can have when they do this. To be able to listen to themselves, because often the body knows what the head doesn't. And you get that sort of visceral response, not just in magic, but in lots of circumstances, but it takes, you have to trust yourself to be able to listen to it. And a lot of people don't trust themselves, right?
That's it. I'm been on a whole journey for that for a long time. I'm a hypnotherapist. My career is helping people understand what their consciousness is trying to get through to them. Work in co-creation with your inner self rather than fighting.
Yeah, co-creation. That's a great way to put it. It really is a co-creation.
Yes. Yeah. And so, how long have you worked with the PGM?
Oh, I don't know. It's been a bunch of years. I do have, but like anything else, it fluctuates. I have responsibilities, and I don't just sit around all day doing that. I live in the real world and have people to answer to. And, it's always frustrating. Sometimes you want to do magic, but you have too many obligations, or, when windows of time open up, they don't match, with what you need. So it's always a challenge, right? To find time to practice and performance. So some years I do more than others, but it also depends on a lot of the stuff I do. A lot of the workings in the PGM are compulsive, meaning they use the magic of compulsion. They're sort of, the idea is these powers that dictate our life are so powerful. A little prayer isn't going to help. You actually have to dig your hands into the fiber of destiny and pry apart the strands and step through it to get where you're going. Like it takes a muscular attempt to change your life. But much of, I don't do that on a daily basis. A lot of times I do sort of devotional work to those powers I'm most attracted to, like Hekate or Hekate, the goddess of liminality, or the sun, soul, that power that every day when I get dressed, the light comes through the window and it strikes my face. And I just think, again, I want to be sun-like, and I'll say a little spontaneous hymn to that power and say, here you are rising from the grave again. Your gaze sees everything. The light you give makes everything live. Your brightness, your lightness, your never-ending strength. Let me be like that, O sun. Let me be a sun in my world, in my realm. Let me rise again, as I get older and creakier, and as I get, sick or disheartened, let me rise up, sun-like, emanating power and light and life and warming and encouraging everything I come in contact with. So I try to find little moments throughout the day to sort of connect with those powers in kind of a simple way, just for devotional rites, to keep me connected to that world. So I'm not always just demanding stuff or trying to twist the arm of fate, right? Like,
yes. And so with all that practice over the years, what are some of the things you've noticed of changes within your life of just that personal power, self-understanding, or actual gifts from these deities and universes that have?
I think everyone has a different response based on their own personal destiny and the own efforts they put out and their own what fortune has in store for them. I can say the biggest way in which this magic has helped me is it's helped me put me in contact with the people that I've come to love and depend on in my life. And it made me realize that a lot of the things I thought I wanted, what I was really missing was a connection with people who were passionate and who were creative and who were loving and who had, an inner integrity and a strangeness to them that matched my own. And it made me, and it's really improved my life, how weirdly doing these workings and teaching these courses has connected me to sort of a constellation of people that are all kind of brilliant and weird in their own way. And it's a great reassurance, that it's okay to be weird and not entirely usual. But so it's been a great entree, to the worlds of other people. And a lot of them have given me glimpses of their magic. And it's just fascinating. Some of them, there's people from Eastern Europe still practicing folk traditions that never ended from the time of the Romans. They might use the names of saints, but it's the exact same traditions. It's talking to people who live in the Southeast Asia, where magic is just a part of their life. It's not considered an alternate spiritual path. People from North Africa who are dealing in Muslim tradition of jinn and stuff like that. But their spiritual, the ways they treat the jinn is very much in sync with the PGM magic. And why shouldn't it be? They're both African traditions, right? But still, it's remarkable to see, oh my God, like their tradition never ended. That is a continuing tradition of magic that reflects the paradigm of the PGM. And to talk to people in other traditions or who have different and fascinating jobs, people that wrangle horses, people that embalm bodies, people who, perform science, all of whom found ways to integrate their magic into their careers, writers and directors and people who are law enforcement or hunters or things like that. And yet you see how this magic finds expression in their lives. And it's humbling, but it's beautiful too. And it shows you how various and multi-fashioned these works can be. And it's reassuring too, because it shows you like it's for everyone. Anyone can do this. You don't have to be someone who has divine visions. You don't have to be the seventh son of a seventh son. You don't have to be, you can perform the magic. Now, some people apprehend spirit presence more easily, right? I do think there's really people that have visions, and there are people that actually have some electric, experiences. And I'm not one of them, but I can tell you that even with my dull sensitivities and my, diminished capacity, I've seen and felt things that have, chilled me and shocked me and amazed me, so much so to make me really understand that these powers are real. And when we reach out to them, there is something that reaches back, which is both thrilling and kind of nervous-making.
I like what you said there as well, and I'd seen something on your website about that I liked. Well, you point out there's no gatekeeper. It doesn't matter,
Right.
your race or your age or your religion. You don't have to be initiated into some sort of order with this. This is based on writings from working low class people, that it's about the relationship you build with the other side, rather than
Right.
something that pre-exists to determine whether or not you can or can't.
Exactly. The great initiatory schools of Egypt, where you could become an Egyptian priest in a pagan tradition, are long gone. So no one at this point can tell you or me, you can't do this. Now, the flip side of this is we'll never be initiated, authentic priests in a pagan Kemetic tradition. But the upside is this: the works themselves, the magical words, still have power. The gods themselves still exist. The technology of casting a spell and calling a spirit are still functional. And the results that they hoped for and sometimes got are the results that we can hope for and sometimes get. It's like the fact that the tradition of the samurai may be gone, but you can still find a samurai sword. You can still read the way of the sword. You can still practice with that sword. You can still draw blood with that sword. You and I couldn't call ourselves a samurai without it being kind of, inaccurate, but we could wield a sword if we worked hard enough, if respectful enough for the tradition, if we were, really tried to become one with it, availed ourselves of all the study we could, how to use it, and spent hours working with it, we could become adept at using it. The magic of the PDM is like that sword. We'll never be what they were, but what they used is available to us. And it's both functionally helpful. It can protect us. It can make us find love, money, insight, healing, etc. But it can also change us internally, just as that person working with that sword loses themselves in the practice of it and becomes something more than they were. The sword becomes an extension of your arm if you're a true swordsman, right? Just like if you're a biker, just like if you're a fisherman, you're rod and reel. Just like if you're a writer, that the art becomes part of the artist. If we work with this system, it becomes an extension of us. We become like a chimera, part one thing, part another, part contemporary person, and part someone who wields ancient magic. And we become kind of beautiful and strange, but why not? We only got one life. Why be normal, right?
Exactly. You got to be unique to your soul, and
Exactly.
like you said, when you start doing that, you find the others that appreciate exactly what that is, and it just grows and expands exponentially from there.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Right.
Yeah, in primary school, we're all taught, no, you can't be that. You've got to be this other thing, and so I think of this day and age, that's the thing everybody needs the most, is to start to allow themselves to be whatever weird version of themselves they feel like being, and see what that magnetizes in.
Right. There's a great saying, it's that if you don't tell the world who you are, the world will tell you.
Yes.
And all of us have had that experience. If you let other people define you, your family, your friends, people at work, lovers, business partners, whatever, inevitably the role they give you is a fraction of what you would hope it would be. If you let other people define you, and often we do just to get along, like we have to maintain relationships. You may constantly make compromises, make concessions. It's what it is to be an adult and live in the world in a functional web of relationship. We have to make money. We have to put food on the table. We have to maintain this relationship or remain in contact with people that, But the thing is, you're constantly being defined by their definition, which is reductive very frequently. And so it's a way of redefining yourself in a way that's more powerful, more potent, and it evades, other people can't do anything with it. They can say, I don't understand it, whatever, but it's like, it's not for you, it's for us. And it's a way to recapture that territory and sort of expand that sphere of influence and just that sense of self, because as I get older, a lot of getting older is having other people chip away at this sense of what you are and what you could have been. And very frequently, there's a great temptation to accept their version of us. You say, well, I guess he's right. I guess I never fulfilled my potential. I guess she's right. I'm just a blah, blah, blah. But those words are very damaging. And that narrative, once it gets in our head, you can't get out of it. It's like a loop, and it controls our choices. So choices that could lead to great experiences or pride or pleasure or new things, we don't even make the choice because we've allowed ourselves to be defined by others. So it's a way to sort of break that pattern, performing magic, and redefine who we are. And some people, it's funny, Lance, some people even say, I'm drawn to this, but I really don't know if I believe in like Isis and Osiris. And it's like, well, of course you don't. Like, you're not an ancient Egyptian, right? You don't have to pretend. That's a great thing. Like, if you're going to be a Christian, if you don't believe in Christ, you better pretend you do, because that's the sine qua non. That's the thing without which you cannot be a Christian. You have to have faith, right? But that is not an aspect of this tradition. This tradition is based on deeds, not words. You can have your own hesitations. You can think in your mind, maybe this is all, maybe the gods are aspects of my personality, or maybe they're Jungian archetypes, or maybe they're, they're cultural aspects of the world. It doesn't matter. Don't drive yourself crazy. People can't change the way they think. We can say we will, but we don't. Whether you think spiritual things are real or not, ghosts or not, UFOs or not, Bigfoot or not, you're not going to be convinced otherwise by any sort of evidence. It's sort of inherent. If you're drawn to these mysteries, allow yourself to say the words. I don't know who Isis and Osiris was. I've read so much about these gods, but I'll never know what it was like to be an Egyptian in the year 300 and hear the word Osiris, like what that did to them inside. It had a deep, deep resonance. We know the mythology, but that's not where it would live in them, you know. It would live in them this sense. It would have something to do with the Nile flooding and the green things growing and knowing there would be enough to eat again after the hard seasons, and this sense of excess beauty and sadness and the luxury of enough to eat for another season. Like, we can't capture it. It was cultural. But when we say these words, we unlock gates within our mind and in our heart, and things can start to change without us knowing why. You call upon these powers, maybe they're just masks for the phenomenon of the cosmos or for archetypes within us. We'll never know. It doesn't matter. The point is the act of calling upon them, the act of saying their name, the act of doing the magic, like you did, walking out in the middle of the night and looking at the moon and listening to your own heart, saying here or do it over there, of speaking words, of calling upon powers, and then waiting, and then listening to your own body, and in the days following, looking at your surroundings and what happens to you, and asking the question, did that change me? If so, how? Did it benefit or hurt me? If so, how? Do I feel any different for having done that? That's a healthy thing to do. That's how someone grows magically and in real life, by giving themselves the luxury of doing that. But it takes a bit being like the fool in the tarot deck, right? Walking around with this funny hat. It takes you sort of shrug off what other people may think or your own hesitations and inhibitions and say, I'm going to do this. I don't care. It seems fun and cool and weird. Why not? We only live for a short while. Why be dull? Why be dignified? Why toe the line one's whole life? Like, why not get weird and see what happens? And that's where the magic comes, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm going to presume a few people listening to this have been really inspired or intrigued from these things you're saying. And some of them probably aren't listening until like 2026, 27, something like this. These two classes that you talk about, you said you run it for a year, but you run this every 6 months as well as a cycling thing with each of
these are year-long courses. So these courses we do every week. There's another video, another PDF that drops listing one or sometimes two spells with notes on how they could be done and notes kind of explaining what I think about them, some insights I have about them. And they can view and look at these at any time. I do try to do these courses twice a year. For people that might have missed them in the spring, I try to do them in the fall. But, that's always, God's willing and to make sure that I have the bandwidth and that people are interested. So, yeah, I do try to, like, I've created these classes. I created PGM1 a year and a half ago. PGM2 I created last year, and I'm about to finish the final videos of it, with this month. And so I like these long form courses because it feels like a real journey, a year's journey. You do anything for a year and you're going to feel afterwards like you really gain firsthand knowledge of it in a very real way, So, yeah.
So they're still going to be able to join back in if they feel like they've missed it.
Yeah, right. If someone does. And also sometimes people look at it and say, oh gosh, it looks great, but I just lost my job last week, or I've it's a little pricey. But people that contact me, if they ask for help, I'm not opposed to give them a break on the price if they have a reason for it, and if they're genuinely interested in the class. So if people feel really drawn to this, don't let that drive you away. And it's also, I should mention this too, it's a great way to meet people, because what we do is I create these Facebook groups, and people are welcome to join them. They don't have to, but they can. And if they do, oftentimes we'll have dozens of people from all over the world. There'll be people from China, people from Canada, South America, people from Europe and Australia. And it's, on one hand, it's a great way to chat with and and discuss the material with people you'd never meet otherwise, who live on the opposite side of the world that might have great insights. And sometimes people say, hey, let's both do the right tonight and see what happens, and compare notes with someone on the opposite side of a globe, which is really cool. And sometimes people discover there's a classmate that lives 10 miles away from them. They're like, oh my God, you're like, we go to the same school, And then I've seen people make good friends just by coincidence, by running into someone in these classes. So there's a social element too for those who want it. You don't have to participate, but you can. And it's a nice way to meet people. It's a very courteous environment. Everyone's friendly and supportive. It's nice, and it can be eye-opening too.
Sounds golden. And so I'll have it in the show notes, but where can people find you?
Oh, sure. The courses right now are offered on a website called the Blackthorne School, and that's Blackthorne with an E at the end of it. So if they were to look up www.blackthorneschool.com, or just do a Google search for my name and Blackthorne School or PGM1 or PGM2, it'll come up. I have a website, jackgrayle.com, with pretty much just links to the Blackthorne School. I also have a course that's on offer. It's a year-long course on the magic and Homer's Iliad and Odyssey that's on Miskatonic Books website, because they offer courses now. So if someone wanted something totally different, wanted to read through the Iliad and Odyssey or listen to it and discuss the magical aspects, there's that. So I'm trying to curb my enthusiasm for year-long courses because it
juggle each week.
But I always tell people, like, you can take it in your own, in your own time. You can take it in small. How do you eat a whale? One bite at a time. Like, take it, and you don't have to do all the spells. I've had some people. This is funny, Lance. I've some people say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, Jack. I know we're 30 weeks in, but I haven't done the spells for weeks 11, 12, and 13. But I promise I will." I'm like, I look them up and I'm like, these 3 death curses. I'm like, dude, you don't have to do the spell. Like, I'm presenting the material. It's optional, right? You don't have to do the lust spell if you already have a healthy relationship. You don't have to do the death spell if you have no enemies. You don't have to do the, the get me out of jail spell if you're not in jail. I do think often these spells, there's often an external, practical, thaumaturgic aspect to them, like literally get me out of jail. If you're literally in jail, you can do the get me out of jail spell. But I do think you can do them for basically a metaphorical jail, right? People who are trapped in a relationship. Well, that's in many ways, that's a more difficult jail. But an abusive relationship is far more dangerous jail than a literal one. Or people trapped by their birth religion that they just can't let go of the hangups, even though they no longer want to participate in it. Or people trapped in the jail of their own biases or their own sense of self-worth. So some of these spells can be upcycled into spiritual workings with very little change to the wording of the spell. But you can do that. These texts are meant to be like raw material that the person doing them can adjust, amend, adapt, add to, cut. You don't like a sentence, cut the sentence. You want to add an instruction to the deity. You want to add a few words of praise and less of, combative tone, do it. These are raw material. It's meant to be your magic. This isn't like just reciting the Epic of Gilgamesh, right? Where we just do it to honor a tradition. We're not part of that tradition. We become part of it when we actually do the magic. But what makes it relevant and contemporary is when we do the magic in a way that's relevant to ourselves, our own style, our own method of speech, and that's why it can be adapted. So I'm saying 2 things at once. Like, 1, you don't have to do every spell, but 2, even the spells that don't look like it's something you would do, there can be ways to do them that are actually can bring about internal change and results and benefits that aren't the literal original meaning of the spell.
That makes sense. Like you described there with jail and relationships, like in Australia, the national statistic is like 7 times people have to leave an abusive relationship before they actually stay left because they get ordered back into jail. And and at the very beginning of this chat, you talked about one of the spells being of getting your master not to whip you and beat you. would fit with that same concept. And even if it's not a physically abusive relationship, that
Right.
dynamic would
Right.
work of the mental abuse that happens within different
Absolutely.
dynamics, that you'd be able to twist and work this. And I'm a big fan of an energy healing art called Reiki, which people use that ancient word for, and it peeves me off because it's like 100 years old. But I love that so much because it's about your own relationship with the other, with the energy,
Yeah.
and there's no gatekeeper, there's no rules, there's no structure. It's what it shows you. And like every religion and most magical practices around the world are about someone had the divine interaction, that learnt the script, the process, the thing. They got handed the tablet, so to speak, of the will of the god, and you've just got to learn off that person, and they're essentially this gatekeeper of
Right.
that relationship is. And everything I try and do, I try and help people understand, well, that's just one man's interpretation of spirit. You want your interpretation of spirit, and so anything you get, you should be able to try and have a play with it to change it. When you were describing the PGM of what it is, I had flashes in my mind of like the Bible, like it, that became a canon because a group of people got together and went through a bunch of different scrolls and went, this is in, that's out, this is going in
Yeah.
this order.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
they weren't all connected. They weren't all written by the same person. They didn't come from the same
Right.
place. And plenty have been found later that should be in there that are not. That's what this is. And your thing is to read it and see how it inspires you and work with it. And from what you've described of these classes, it sounds like that's what you've done, and you're trying to connect that with everybody else to play and find their version, to then come back to you and go, hey, I tweaked it and did this. And you're like, ooh, next lunar eclipse, I'm going to do the same.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. If you heard, the Thomas Jefferson, the American president, he was famous for having his Thomas Jefferson Bible. He'd gone through his Bible, he'd cut out all the pages, and he cut out all the miracles, and he put it back together again, the New Testament, because he personally found no validation in magic, but he loved the compassionate acts and people that acted with integrity and the intellectual aspects of a sacrifice redeeming people. So he created his own Bible from that. And in a very real way, that's what we're doing. When we go through these texts, people are going to look through them and say, like, I would never do that one. This one, I would only do if it was internal, not an external working. That one, I'm going to do literally as written. Absolutely. This other one, I don't know. I might mix it with that one. I'll take this Artemis spell, put it together with this Hekate spell, and it'll make something new. And that's exactly what they should be doing. It's raw material. It doesn't matter. All that matters is if it gets you closer to the divine, if it helps you express the unexpressible, if it helps you experience what has heretofore been inexperienceable, then it's right. And what it does is it encourages us to listen to that voice, that same voice that you're so good at listening to when you were out there, this place or that place, and you listen, and it tells you. Once, twice, three times, you listen, and it tells you. Throw it away, bring it back, it tells you. So many people can't hear that voice, So many people have stifled that voice. They'll often just say, well, tell me, how many times do I do it? Tell me, how will I know if it worked? Tell me, is this one for me or should I wait for another one? And it's like that, no one should be able to tell you that. That's deeply personal. It's like someone say, tell me what I think is funny. Well, no one can tell you that. Or what do I think is sexy? What should be sexy? No one can tell you what should be sexy. It's like, what do you find funny, sexy, meaningful, worthy of your attention? But a lot of people, that voice has been, they're deaf to it. And there's a process of reawakening, but it comes in the silence of ritual. It comes when you're alone with yourself, whether you're standing outside at night or whether you're in your bedroom, holding the text, or if you're just sitting before a candle. It comes in the silence, this voice. And sometimes it often says things that we don't want to, that don't sound right. You know what I mean? And it can also be intermingled with a voice that's just self-criticism, saying, what are you doing? This is not for you. You look stupid. This is foolish. Why don't you go watch TV? Right. But it takes a bit of time to just sort of live with that voice. Say, all right, I've heard that critical voice, and I'm going to just keep sitting here because I told myself I would for like 20 minutes. And there's a second voice that you start to hear, which speaks very quietly, but it's very discernible, and once you start hearing it, you can't unhear it again. And the more you listen to it, the louder it gets.
Exactly. And internally for everybody, that's different as well from what I've experienced. Everybody's inner voice, inner imaging, there's a spectrum of how that works, and it's up to you to work out how to interact. PGM2 sounds like a fun way to experience some understanding of that.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, thanks for having a chat. This has been wonderful. I look forward to seeing some more of your work.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Lance. Thanks for inviting me on the show. Thanks for everything. And if anyone wants, if any listeners have any questions about the course or anything else, feel free to message or contact me.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed
All the
this
details
episode
have been in the show
and
notes
perhaps
for you to
learned
find that
something
out.
new. If you did,
Have a great evening, everyone.
Subscribe.
You too.
Or
Take
drop
care.
a review on whatever favorite podcast you have, or if you've been enjoying the video versions on YouTube or Facebook, do it there. If something really did click home for you with this episode, perhaps it could benefit one of your friends or family. If so, it'd really help if you shared this on your social medias. Until next time, you've been listening to Akasha Talks with Lance Baker.